Hello and welcome to Natural Sciences. Today's topic is feeding relationships, and we are going to look at some practice activities under this topic. So our first question says, the following picture shows a variety of different animals found in South Africa. Study the picture and answer the questions that follow. So this is the picture that we need to take a close look at. So if you can see, we have our elephant, that's the first animal. We have the goose, the horse, up until the zebra. Right, so now let us look at what the question requires us to do. So our question says, what is a herbivore? Give 4 examples of herbivores in the picture. So the first thing that we need to do is explain what a herbivore is. If you remember from the lesson, we said herb means plants and vor means to eat. So now these are organisms that eat plants. Right, so now let us go to the picture and try and identify animals that eat plants. Right, so let us look through. The first animal that I can identify that eats a plant is the horse from the first row. And then we have the second example, which is the impala. We also have the grasshopper and our cow down there. So now let us go back and answer our question. So our herbivore, not sure if the handwriting is clear. That feed on plants. Right. So that is what herbivores are, animals that feed on plants. Now, our first example of that is the horse. We then have the impala. Then we have the grasshopper. And lastly, we have our cow. Right, so we have managed to answer the first question of our practice activity. Even if you found different ones because there's more in this picture, that is still okay. We are then going to move on to the second question. So the second question is still using the same picture, but now they are saying, what is a carnivore? Give 4 examples of carnivores. Now, if you remember, we said carni means flesh, and again, vor means to eat. Right, so now these are flesh-eating organisms. So we start by explaining what a carnivore is. These are animals that eat or feed on other animals because they are eating flesh, right? Now let us go into the picture and identify or try and identify carnivores. So when I'm looking at the first row, I can't identify one. Let me see, right. So the first one that I'm identifying is the vulture. And then the next one is the shark. I'm also identifying the crocodile down there and also identifying the lion here. Right, so those are my 4 examples. Obviously, you are welcome to have different ones. So we said the first one is vulture. And then the second one is a lion. Third one is our shark. Then the fourth one is our crocodile. Right, so you should also remember that carnivores can be divided into 4 depending on what they eat, right? So we are then going to move on to our next activity. So what we have over here is a food web. Now let us look at our first question. From the food web, list 2 examples of predators. So that is our first activity. We need to look at predators or 2 examples of predators. Now we are going to come to the food web, and we already know that predators, these are the animals that hunt and kill and eat their prey. So when we are looking at this picture, our predators are these animals that we find on top here. So for number 1, we are going to choose the fox. That's our first predator. And we are then going to choose our snake. That's our second predator. Snake. So we have 2 examples of predators. Now let's move on to number 2. Number 2 says list 2 organisms that are eaten by the snake. So now we are going to go to the snake and look at 2 examples of organisms that are eaten by the snake. Now the first one is the bird. If you look at the bird, there is an arrow that shows the transfer of energy from the bird to the snake. So that is our first example, or the first organism that is eaten by the snake. So that is the bird. And then when we look at our second example, it is the frog, because there's an arrow going towards the snake, which shows us that the energy is moving from the frog to the snake. So our second organism is the frog. Yes, and that is our second question. Now let us move on to the third one. The third one says, name the producer in the food web. If you remember, we said that producers are organisms that have the ability to make their own food. In this instance, the example of a producer would be our grass over here. So number 3 is grass. Right. And then we are going to move on to our very last question, which says, what do we call organisms that eat producers and other animals? If you remember from our lesson, we said these are omnivores. Omnivores. When we are speaking about omnivores, these are the organisms that eat both plants and animals. So if you were able to answer all of these questions, then well done to you. Right, this is our last practice activity. Now here we are going to have to study the diagram which describes feeding relationships between organisms in an ecosystem, and then answer the questions that follow. Now let us look at this picture. We have grass that is being eaten by the grasshopper. If you remember, well, we said arrows show what is being eaten and where the energy is being transferred to. So grass being eaten by grasshopper. The grasshopper is being eaten by the rat being eaten by the owl. Right, we have looked at our picture. Now let's just jump into our question. The first one says, what do we call this diagram? That is the first question that we have. So the transfer of energy from one organism to the next, we said it is called a food chain. Very good. That is what we call this diagram. Number 2 says, name the producer in this diagram. Right, so our producers are organisms that make their own food. In this case, it's the grass. Yes, I'm sure we all got that one. Right, number 3, from the consumers in the diagram, identify the herbivores and the carnivores. Herbivores, animals that eat plants. Carnivores, animals that eat meat from other animals. So we are going to start with the herbivore. Our herbivore in this diagram is the grass. Grass. Wow, no, it's not going to fit there. Right, let's do this. Yeah, grass hopper. Can we all see? I think that's fair. And then we are going to move on to our carnivore. Our carnivore in this case is the rat and the owl. Because if you look at our question, it says carnivores. So that's more than one. So the question says, the rat also eats seeds and other animals. Therefore, what do we call the rat? So the rat is eating seeds, which is plants, and other animals, which is meat. So this makes the rat the omnivore in this case, because it feeds on both the animal and a plant. So that is it for now. I will see you after the ad break.